Good morning and welcome back. We are on day 263 of the 365 days of this Bible study. At the moment, we're looking at the parables of Jesus in St. Luke's Gospel, and I'm recording this on a grey autumn morning, and I'm reading about a huge banquet and the cost of being a disciple. Luke chapter 14, verses 15 to 35. One of the people sitting at the dinner table with Jesus in the Pharisee's house heard what Jesus was saying and replied, "How happy are those who are going to the banquet in God's kingdom." But Jesus replied like this: "Once upon a time, there was someone who was giving a huge feast. He invited a lot of people to it. When it was ready, he sent his servant round to those invited with the message, 'Come now, it's ready.' But they all as one began to beg off. The first told the servant, 'Excuse me, please, I've just bought a field and must go and inspect it.' Another said, 'I've just bought 5 pairs of oxen and I need to give them a test drive. Please accept my apologies.' Another one said, 'I'm on my honeymoon, I can't possibly come.' So the servant came back and told his boss, who was furious. He told his servant, 'Quick, go out to the streets and alleys. Bring in the poor, the disabled, the blind and the lame.' The servant came and said, 'I've done as you ordered, but there's still room.' The boss then said to the servant, 'Go out onto the highways and to the hedgerows and make people come. I want my house full. I promise there won't be room for any of those I invited to eat my feast.'" Do you see what's happening here? The table talk at the Pharisees' dinner party has ended with this remark from one of the Pharisees' guests: "Aren't we happy who have been invited to the banquet in God's kingdom?" This guest obviously includes himself and all other Orthodox Jewish believers amongst those invited not only to this feast at the Pharisees' house, but also by extension to that dinner party in the afterlife that Pharisees at the time enjoyed looking forward to. This guest is quite confident that the Pharisees' way of life and devotion would see them all safely included in the invitation list to their heavenly bliss with God. But Jesus was well aware of the anxieties that accompanied that way of life. In their mindset, in order to get your invitation, you really had to deserve it. You had to work super hard to be a perfect keeper of the law of Moses, and no excuses. In that light, how smug that Pharisee was being, to assume that he would make it to the heavenly feast. Anything that distracted you from the path of perfection was a possible threat to your invitation to the eternal banquet. Jesus was aware of this and gave 3 examples of the kinds of distraction that might prevent a Pharisee from being perfect. None of them is all that serious. The first is a business deal that calls the person away from their religious duty. The second is the excitement of some new equipment for the farm, the equivalent of a fleet of new tractors that need testing. And the third was precious to Jews, the exemption of honeymooners from military duty and other obligations. Such very ordinary things as excuses. Jesus would, of course, be aware of how easy it was for them to be distracted and how hard to be perfect. But the ending is shocking. In the story, the people invited had assumed they would be forgiven, but that was not to be. Their places were to be taken by others. The beggars in the city streets were the spiritual waifs and strays of the Jewish faith. The tax collector and other sinners were regarded by Pharisees with utter contempt. Even worse, the vagrants and others in the countryside were regarded not even as Jewish and were totally beneath their regard. That God's house should be filled with such unworthy people, such unbelievers, would never have occurred to the Pharisees. But the gospel is that Christ came to save sinners, and all of us are sinners. Luke's version of the parable is a bit closer to Jesus' original than the version in Matthew, with its severe ending. Luke balances the difficulties of being a Pharisee against the inclusiveness of the kingdom. Look at the urgency with which God fills his house with those who would appreciate his freely given gift. Well, tomorrow we have another parable that has been misused by preachers over the years, which will reward some study to reveal its true meaning. The famous parable of the prodigal son, now properly entitled The Parable of the Two Brothers. I'll see you tomorrow.